I think we should go ahead and jump in. Greetings, everybody. My name's Heather Sabin. I'm your host from Monona Terrace Community and Convention Center here in beautiful Madison, Wisconsin. We are today at about 45 degrees with a forecast of near 70 this weekend. So we could not be more delighted about that. We are finally coming out of our long winter here. I want to extend a warm welcome to you all today. If you've been here with us for previous lectures, welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, we're very glad you're with us. We're pleased to announce that this is the first of 3 lectures we're presenting thanks to a sponsorship by American Institute of Architects, Wisconsin. And this organization, which is headquartered here in Madison, but of course represents the whole state, has been a valued partner for many of Monona Terrace's programs through the years, including our in-person lecture program, which we may resume at some point. We'd like to proceed with some Zoom protocols first. As many of you know, we do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for communication. So if you'd like to use that function to ask questions, our speaker, Max Levy, has graciously agreed to take questions following his presentation today. So we ask you to type questions into that field. And you should also know this program is being recorded. So to access it at a later date, you would go to mononaterrace.com/webinars. And there you'll see all of our online programming archived, but you can find specifically the Wright Design Series library there. So now our program, you're going to see an additional face on the screen today. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Josh Johnson, who is representing the American Institute of Architects, Wisconsin. Josh is a senior architect at ADCI, which is a firm celebrating their 34th year in existence with offices in Lake Delton and Madison. His volunteer work for the AIA over the last 30 years and Monona Terrace over the last 20 has enabled him to help arrange over 100 lectures with Monona Terrace and AIA Wisconsin Conference on Architecture. He also has introduced elementary age children to architecture and urban design in the classroom through a program he helped to create in Texas, and since moving to Wisconsin 20 years ago has been an enthusiastic volunteer for, called here Terrace Town, which is a wildly successful program involving he wrote 1 million aged children, elementary aged children in Dane County. We haven't officially counted. I'm not sure it's hit 1 million yet, but I think easily 10,000, quite easily, and maybe 20,000. It's a very big program. So it's my pleasure to introduce Josh, who's a friend and as you just heard, a terrific volunteer for us. So Josh, take it away.
Sure. Right at that very second, it said my battery is running low on my computer. So thanks so much for partnering with us. And this Monona Terrace lecture series has always been a terrific thing, Heather. And we love the partnership with you folks, and it's been a real joy. So I'm here to introduce Max Levy, and you may have lost me for a second. And Max grew up in Texas, and then in college went to Cal Berkeley, which was a terrific program. And Max, you may not realize this, the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee was created in the 70s, and they patterned themselves after Cal Berkeley. After graduation from that fine institution, he moved to Chicago and went to work for SOM Chicago, which is a firm that has quite a history in the United States and the modern world of architecture, quite well known. In 1984, Max created his own office, and I swear I knew of his work by 1985, so you really hit the ground running. And Max, and he's lectured the last few years at the National Arts Club in New York City, the Kimball Art Museum, the San Diego Museum of Contemporary Art. And he's always considered his his work to be an alliance of architecture and nature. But I tell you, the world of architecture considers him an architect's architect. So Max, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you, Heather. It's a real pleasure to be here. I love this backdrop. When I was in the 5th grade, I looked up the term modern architecture in the encyclopedia. That was our internet back then. And the definition I encountered in the encyclopedia, I didn't really understand. But the definition was accompanied by 3 small black and white classic photographs of falling water. It was, it was like the architectural equivalent of Cupid's arrow into an 11-year-old's heart. And believe me, I spent a lot of time looking at this drawing that's on the screen here. It really thrilled the surging hormones of a teenager all the way through high school. And I became an architect, of course. Although my work is very different than Wright's, and certainly a good deal more modest than his staggering body of work. Nevertheless, my work does share with his this allegiance to nature. And so what I'd like to do today is just to show you some of my work. Speaking of modesty, we're going to go from a waterfall to raindrops. All the rain falling on the roof of this house that I'm about to show you is channeled to this rain pool. And from there, it flows into a runnel and cascades down a hill to a beautiful quarry pond on the site. So the single gable roof there sheds the rain, and you'll see in a moment how it's collected and channeled to that runnel. There actually are 3 small buildings underneath this one gable roof, and they're spaced apart by 2 breezeways. One is an entry terrace on the left, and the other is a carport on the right. The house proper is in the center here. It's the center building, and it's divided in half by a pair of soji screens that can pocket into this glass pocket that projects out in front of the building. And the second level, you've got moving from left to right, you've got a guest bedroom on the right, you've got a master suite in the middle, and you have a study on the right-hand side. This is a bridge going from the master suite over to the study, and this is that pocket that the soji screens pocket into. Long, skinny house. And the gutters, which are 16 inches wide and 4 inches deep to carry the water a long ways to that rain pool. You'll notice they're held down a foot below the eaves so that when you're on the second level and you're looking out the windows, you can actually enjoy the rain falling into the gutters. Channeled all the rain to this point here. And when you come onto this site, your first view of the quarry pond is framed by this breezeway. So then the rain comes, and if it rains about 1/4 of an inch, that little rain pool overflows, water cascades down to the pond. So this house does more than just look out onto the pond. It actually is connected in a deeper way with the setting. One thing that I like about this design approach is that, for example, it doesn't actually have to be raining in order for the poetics of this approach to have an effect on the viewer. We brought all the exterior materials throughout the interior of the house. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright taught us all that if you could bring the natural exterior materials into the interior, it deepens a sense of shelter. By the way, there's the Soji screen I was talking about that can pull across and divide this ground floor in half. Many of you may be familiar with Osamu Noguchi, made these wonderful lanterns. This is the least expensive Noguchi lantern you can get. We got a dozen of them and then built an armature and created a chandelier out of them. The kitchen is actually open to the dining area, but when you want to veil the kitchen, there's a shade that drops down out of a slot out of the ceiling, and silk screened onto that shade is an abstracted floor plan and site plan of this project. Screen porch with a fireplace. Stairway up to the master suite. And the master suite overlooks that two-story living room. You may have noticed in some of the other shots that the ceiling throughout is this zinc-colored sheet metal that's held in place by stainless steel screws. The idea here is to emulate the underside of that rain cloud that I showed you the picture of earlier. In Texas, we are afraid of tornadoes and thunder, but we love the shade that the rain clouds give us. And so this house is basically a shady place. Now to a very different site, although water is involved here too. We have a small cottage under construction in the Bahamas. And the striking thing about the Bahamas, the second you get off the boat there, you're really struck by the color everywhere. There's the vivid colors. You're struck by the vivid sunlight. And so those two characteristics, color and sunlight, we sought to bring into play in this cottage. The previous slide was taken over there on the right on that beach looking out to a bay. The house is 60 feet above that beach on a bluff. Once again, it's a long, skinny rectangle, a single gable. To the right of the gable is a little guest house, and to the left is a cart storage building. Only golf carts on this island. And the circle is a cart turnaround. Now I'll explain what those four squares are that run down the ridge of the roof of the main house. There's a study model of the roof. You see four skylights, sort of chimney shaped. In fact, we refer to them as light chimneys. And each one faces a different direction of the compass. So this yellow one is facing east to greet the morning sun. And just looking at it diagrammatically, sun moves around to the south and it shines into another light chimney. And the interiors of these light chimneys are painted in colors sympathetic to the compass directions. So the one facing south is green, the one facing west for the sunset is sort of a flamingo color. And then the one facing north is kind of an aqua blue. And then those light wells fan out As you see here, we're looking at the underside of the roof. And at any given time of day, standing in this house, looking down through the house, one of these light wells is going to be more brilliantly illuminated than the others. And so that puts you in touch with the movement of the sun and with the activation of color. And we anticipate that this house will have sort of a pulse. It'll have a life of color and light in harmony with this sense that I mentioned in the Bahamas. So here's the floor plan with the light wells superimposed over it. Very elementary floor plan with moving from left to right. It's the living, dining, kitchen space on the left. Once again, a breezeway where the yellow light well is. That breezeway also, once again, frames a view of water, though this time the water is this beautiful aqua-colored bay. And to the right is the master bedroom. And you'll notice in the plan, all of the sliding glass doors and sliding screens all pocket into the walls. And I believe when they're all open, this place is going to feel somewhat like a habitable ruin. At least I hope so. There's a section through the whole thing. On the left, you'll see the cart building has this stairway that wraps around it up to a deck on the roof. And from that deck, you can look out to the left, which is east, look over the island. The island's only a half a mile wide, and you can see the Atlantic over there. And then if you come down the steps and through the breezeway and over to the right, you'll be on the roof of the guest house, and there will be this beautiful view of the bay. Under construction, as I mentioned. The whole surface of the site is just sand. It's very densely, it's a dense jungle, but the floor is sand. But anything will grow in it. And so our cart turnaround is just going to be a disc of grass. Here's the breezeway. This is not Photoshop. The water is actually that color. It's really wonderful. And there you can see the little deck on top of the cart building in the foreground. And then you see the deck on top of the guest house to the right of the main portion of the house. And here are some brave souls cladding our roof and light chimneys with copper, which should weather out about the color of that water that you see on the right. Now to another very different site. This is, we did a weekend retreat for an extended family in East Texas. Many people think of Texas as just being, the whole state being arid, but really the eastern third of the state is actually very densely wooded. And you're looking at just some conceptual diagrams that occurred very early in the design process where we're trying to resolve the dilemma between buildings and trees. This family wanted to retreat to the woods, but if you put a 3,000 square foot house on this site, the middle diagram shows you how many trees you knock out. So we decided to try making each room of the house a separate little building and slip them between trees and not cut down any trees. This being just a weekend place, we wanted to be sober about construction costs. So we looked for literally the least expensive exterior wall and roof material. And we came up with lowly composition shingles. But it turns out that those actually come in a number of colors that are very sympathetic to the woods. So we built some mock-up panels and tested them out there, and we wound up choosing 5 different colors for our different little buildings. And even though it's a lowly material, we still like to give attention to craft. I think that goes back to my experience at SOM in Chicago. They never used composition shingles, I assure you. Another feature of this site, before we look at the buildings, it's in an area known as Wind Point. And I think because of the lay of the land and the orientation of the topography, there's always a nice breeze coming across the site. So we wanted to open up to those breezes, turn off the air conditioning, and but the thought of having all these little buildings and all the buildings having a lot of windows in it, it seemed tedious to crank open everything. So we thought, let's do huge windows. I mean, like 7-foot by 7-foot windows that can pivot out and actually gather in the breezes, kind of almost like rudders. You know, if we just did sliding glass doors, you know, obviously we'd get some breeze, but by reaching out to the breeze and steering the breeze, we could benefit from that. That's what these sketches are showing. And in addition, these sketches are acknowledging the fact that in the East Texas woods, there's lots of bugs. And so we thought, well, let's screen in these window swings. And we studied that in model form. Our little buildings, you know, are just going to be the most elementary gabled boxes covered in a single color of composition shingles. But they would blossom with these ephemeral screen structures hanging off of them. So we developed this plan, which was actually very tricky to do, to slide these buildings in a seemingly organized way. You're seeing guest cabins and a master cabin and a main building with the living, dining, kitchen and a bunkhouse with a couple of bunk rooms. And they're all oriented like a school of fish in the woods, so the prevailing breezes can just comb through the project. And then these breeze structures just sort of shear off the breezes into the cabins. So here we go. The whole thing's sort of floating above the ground. We didn't want to do any site grading. So all the buildings are raised up off the ground, just a foot or two. So the armadillos could go about their business. This project was very difficult to photograph, actually, because it just sort of melts into the woods. It's like architectural camo. In the foreground, though, you see one of those one of the breeze structures hanging off the side of the building. So what's going on there is you've got a sheet metal lid on top. You got insect screen in the vertical plane. And then at the bottom of the breeze structure, you have insect screen as well. And then pivoting out into that, for example, there's a 5-foot wide by 8-foot tall window that pivots out and you can lock it in place. The interior material of all these cabins is just MDF board, medium density fiber board. And in this context, it's sort of interesting, because of the shape of the space and because of the context, it almost seems like a canvas tent. And then you just open a couple of these big pivot windows and it really does feel sort of like camping out. This is a bunkhouse. The screened walkway on the bunkhouse taking you down to the shared bathroom. The main building straight ahead, that building is 100 feet long and 15 feet wide with a screen porch at each end of it. Again, big pivot door that for cross ventilation. And again, this tent-like quality. You're looking at the kitchen, which is a 30-foot long island. This is the convivial heart of the place. You notice in the foreground that paper airplane hanging down. it's actually a sheet metal paper airplane connected to a rod, connected to a wind vane on the roof. So this theme of breeze is legible inside the building. You can look up and see which way the wind is blowing. This is down at the other end of the main building, the living room, and another screen porch out there. And you see a niche off to the right. It's a fireplace niche with built-in seating, and we stenciled on the wall the owner's favorite poem by William Butler Yeats. It's a poem about retreating to the woods, to your little hut, to get away from the ills of the city. One other fireplace down on the ground. And the brown building in the background, that's the master suite with the best view. Now, I didn't do this building. This is an ancient dovecote. Centuries ago, the skies above Europe were darkened with huge flocks of doves. And townspeople would come together and they would build dovecotes like this to entice the doves to roost in their midst, and thereby gaining for the townspeople eggs and meat and fertilizer. At some point, the dove population declined. The dovecotes began to just sit idle, and people began to place the ashes of the remains of their loved ones in the niches. I guess, this pairing of images of doves and or souls flying out of the niches somehow gave rise to the notion of a columbarium. Columba means dove. Well, we were asked to do a columbarium for a large Episcopal church in Dallas to accommodate 1,000 souls. It sits on a level lawn. The lawn is framed by mature oak trees. The oak trees also happen to frame a view of the sky above the site. And that direction up just seemed like the way into this design. Certainly that view up was very significant to this project, I thought. So the columbarium consists simply of 4 thick masonry walls with the niches in them. And they harbor, the 4 walls harbor 3 courts. And there you see the walkway that goes from the street through the columbarium up to the narthex of the church. And although the courts they look identical here, they actually have different character by way of, each one is equipped with bronze details that the bronze details acknowledge different attributes of the sky. So one court does something with breezes, one does something with rain, one does something with the passage of the sun and clouds, as you'll see here in a moment. The idea behind all of this is that if you lift your gaze, if you can invite people to lift their gaze, that can sometimes help lift spirits. So you enter through a bronze gate. You see all the little niches with stone plaques sealing them. And down at the end of this court, there's a tall, slender cross standing there. I don't know if you can see it in the slide. You walk in there, you can hear your footsteps on the crushed granite. That cross it has a very sensitive ball bearing pivot, and so it's designed as a wind vane. So even on days when it seems like there's no breeze at all, that cross will slowly turn a little bit in the wind and slowly change position. And those subtle movements are really kind of an arresting contrast to the stillness of this space. The sail coming off the back of the cross is perforated bronze, so the movements are very languid. You know, we didn't want this thing to whip around. In the center court, we do something with rainfall. You see that bronze vessel on top of the wall. That collects rainwater. The rain is channeled to that basin. And then next to the basin are bud vases, little bronze bud vases. When it rains, you can pick up a bud vase and dip it in the basin. And you see on the plaques there some pins projecting from the plaques, and you can actually hang the bud vase on the graveside. In this last court, there are two phenomena. On the right, there are a series of bronze crosses cantilevered out over the wall. This wall faces south. Excuse me. And as the sun wheels overhead, the shadows of crosses brush over the grave sites. And then on the other wall, it appears that some of the niches have been left open. But when you peer into these open niches, you surprisingly see views of the sky and passing clouds. What's happening there is that there are a series of bronze boxes projected through the wall, out the back side of the wall. And on the back side, there's a stainless steel plate at an angle that's polished to a mirror finish. And so it conveys views of sky into the niche. Here's the back side of the wall. So walking by this wall or sitting on a bench near the wall becomes animated with these little flashes of blue and white. So we're going to go now from funerals to weddings. We did a wedding venue out in ranch country outside of Austin. And the rural setting, the agrarian setting, suggested to us that we really should not do a building from the city that's going to look like a flying saucer sitting out there. We wanted our building to just be an agrarian building. And so that's what we did. Also, the budget was so low, it made it easier to do it this way. So it's corrugated galvanized sheet metal, really built pretty much like a barn. But as you'll see, we have a few other things going on in it. You see that big wind vane on the roof, that will be explained here shortly. We pulled the building as close to the street as we could to preserve the 26 acres of rolling native prairie that we look out onto. Again, actually similar floor plan to the ones I've shown you before. It's a long skinny rectangle with a big breezeway through it. This time though, the breezeway is an enormous screen porch, big enough to accommodate a sizable wedding. Two other ceremony spots. There's a ceremony lawn. That's where that picture frame was, the first shot I showed you. And then to the right is the festival hall. We harvest the rainwater off the roof, and it is enough water for the building and to irrigate the grounds. And there's the screen porch. You know, I mentioned it's low budget. It's probably, I guess for square foot, it's the lowest budget project we've ever done. So we just decided to make a virtue of that, and we used 2x4 gang nailed roof trusses like tract home builders use, cheapest way to frame the roof. Exposed the wood studs, but by lining them all up, the trusses are lined with the studs, and by being absolutely meticulous about the spacing, never varying the spacing from one end of the building to the other, and then exposing that structure wherever we can, it actually gives the building a certain kind of nobility. Also dipping it in white, makes it a little more bridal, a little less of a barn. The entire interior of the building is wood siding painted white. To your right, just outside that door that you see there on the right is the ceremony lawn. The client really originally wanted us to do a pavilion out there, but they just didn't have the budget. So we did this 10-foot by 10-foot picture frame standing up against the horizon up on a concrete plinth. The concrete is formed with leftover corrugated. And here's the main hall. There's actually a tradition in Texas of late 19th century rural dance halls that are corrugated galvanized on the outside, wood siding painted white on the inside, with built-in benches all the way around them. So this, this did have some ancestors, this building. But we also added another note to connect it with nature. You see that big ring hanging down there? You can probably guess what's about to happen here. That wind vane has a rod that extends down through the skylight. And it supports this 12-foot diameter ring, which can be decorated like so. And it's hard to convey in the photo. I should actually get a video of this. When you're there, or let me put it this way, wind vanes don't just spin around and around. They slowly change direction depending upon which way the wind's blowing. And oddly enough, on the stormiest days, the movements are even more languid. They're not sudden movements. So when you attend an event here, you see this beautiful arrangement on the ceiling, and it'll be still for a long time. And then all of a sudden it will just turn slightly in one direction and slowly turn in another direction. And it's like the bough of a tree, that movement. And all I can tell you is that there's something about that connects the festivities inside with the world outside. And it's just been a joy to see how people bring their own creativity to this feature. Out on the screen porch, which is also another ceremony site, there's a wall that welcomes flowers. All that's happening here is these are just little blocks of wood that are screwed to the wall. The blocks of wood each have a 3/4 inch hole drilled through them, so you can drop a test tube into the hole. And again, it's just a joy to see what people do with it, whether it's flowers or leaves, or look at this guy. And this one just amazed me. I think if you let architecture be quiet, it invites people forth. Here are just votive candles on those little blocks of wood. Incidentally, that rolling translucent barn door that you see there on the right, that is exactly the same size as the sail for the wind vane. But the majority of people that lease this facility get married out here. I think there must be something about aligning your future with the horizon. you're looking at a real early sketch of another project. In fact, this is the way many buildings begin, just with a tiny conceptual sketch. That sketch, the original of that sketch, is 1.25 inches by 1.25 inches, no kidding. Let me tell you about this one. You know, the most common building type in America is a modest house in a modest neighborhood. I don't know how many are built every year, probably hundreds of thousands. And yet, architecture seldom emerges from that building type. In fact, Frank Lloyd Wright is one of the few architects of note who continually, throughout his career, up to the very end, attempted to solve that problem. And he did, in fact, with his Usonian houses. The thing is now, if you want to do a modestly cost house, and if you tried to build a Usonian house in a modest neighborhood, you couldn't do it. You'd break the bank. All those natural materials brought from the outside through the interior of the house, adding a couple of brave cantilevers. You couldn't afford it. Today, if cost is a problem, you're kind of limited to sheetrock. And so the question is, how on earth do you bring bring soul to a project with sheetrock? In my view, I think one way of doing it is to bring nature into play. So, meanwhile, back at this little sketch, sort of like a sonogram of a building, I just thought initially of taking a row of trees right through the heart of the project. It was totally irrational and totally idealistic, bringing light and nature right through the middle of the project, which immediately divided the house into two wings, so to speak. By the way, this house is just 1,800 square feet. We got the least expensive brick, painted it white. And when you do that, it's sort of like putting a white mat around a picture. It just makes nature so vivid. So we wound up with a day side and a night side to this house. One wing has one car garage, living, dining, and kitchen, then a little glass connector over to the night wing, which is 2 bedrooms and a carport. All these rooms open onto the central court. They have large sliding glass doors that just pocket into the walls. But you see the row of trees down the middle, and on the west side of the house, we did a stand of bamboo. And the roof forms of this house direct rainwater to the planting, as you'll see. Another way to economize on this project was just to make the forms so elementary. And once again, as with the last project, we just used gang nailed roof trusses, 2 feet on center, the same truss over and over again, and that made things easy for the carpenter. Here you can begin to see the gutter, downspout, and then a little runnel going to the tree. The scale of this house is also important. I think often we see modern houses in older neighborhoods. This is a 1950s neighborhood. Modern houses where their scale is all off, and they just sort of clobber the neighborhood. And on this side of the house, all the downspouts are centered on the windows. So inside, it's just sheetrock on a concrete slab. We did paint the ceiling gray, so it wouldn't be just a total marshmallow inside. But you see that in this picture, all these sliding glass doors are pocketed into the walls now. And in mild weather, you can circulate from one wing to the other across the courtyard, which just psychologically makes this house so much bigger. That's a Noguchi lantern, by the way. Another Noguchi lantern above the dining table. I just love those. It's the bedroom wing. That's a guest room that they've got a piano in. And in the backyard, there's a fire ring. And once again, you see this translucent sliding screen, as we've done in other projects. This one can be slid across the courtyard and latched to where at night you still feel totally secure going from one wing to the other across the courtyard. And the last project, we were asked to do an addition to the Stretto House. This is a very famous building designed by Stephen Hall. Many of you may be familiar with him, a New York architect. This building, soon after its construction in 1993, it just became an icon of modernism. Well, how on earth do you add on to such a personal, exuberant work of architecture? That became the dilemma. I'll just explain a little bit about the existing house. There's a creek that runs diagonally across this site, and there are a series of little concrete spillways that go across that creek. Stephen picked up on that in the architecture in the following way. The utilitarian spaces in this house are all housed in these concrete block forms, the 4 forms that you see there. The kitchen, bathrooms, laundry room, storage, and so forth go in those spaces. And between those forms are the living spaces. The living spaces are then roofed with these lyrical roof forms. So the metaphor here is water going over spillways. And the resulting spaces are just voluptuous and very personal. And I didn't want to touch them. Now, we did restore all the surfaces in this house. But in answer to the question, how do you add on to an icon, we resolved the answer is to do so at a distance and quietly. So, existing house on the right, addition on the left. We found a way to sneak off the back side of the existing house through a glazed gallery. The new owners have a lot of artwork, so that worked well. Over to the addition to the left, where we added 3 bedrooms. Each bedroom has its own private screen porch. We continued the theme of utilitarian spaces in the concrete block forms. So bathrooms, dressing areas were in those forms. So here we are coming up the driveway, existing house on the right, new house on the left, same materials on the left. This is a photograph from a book of the original facade of the building, which is on your right. And then in the background, you see the gallery link that we added, and to the left is the addition. Those window shades, by the way, are treated like barn doors. They just slide as one piece of fabric, 14 feet wide. So there's the gallery, the existing carport on your left, just sort of sneaks around the back. And the addition, no lyrical roof forms. We're far away from the creek. It made no sense to mimic the roof forms of the original house. And in fact, the original house has so much architecture going on. We could be quiet over here. As you can see, we actually even embedded the house into a slope to keep it as low as possible to defer to the famous house. At the same time, you don't want to just add on a dull thing, a flat-footed thing. And as I've said in some of the other projects earlier, the way to bring a grace note to a project is to connect with some aspect of nature. The original house here connected with nature through the creeks and the spillways. Here we connect with nature with sunlight. I'll explain these skylights here in a moment. But there you see we're in this little slope. These cylindrical glass skylights have standing in each one of them a shading device. It has a mast that goes from the floor all the way up to the ceiling. And if you'll notice at about waist height, there's a cork grip, just like a fishing pole. And you can grab a hold of that and turn that shading device so that in the wintertime, you can turn the shading device so that it admits direct sunlight into the room. And in the summertime, you turn it and it omits direct sunlight into the room. Very different than drawing the cords of a curtain or pulling down a window shade. You're working with the passage of the sun. And we started calling these things light sails. And I like the fact that there's something nautical about that and relates back to water and the original house. We do have panels on the ceiling so you can close off these light monitors if there's a thunderstorm. And we incorporated a little LED light into the mast so that at night this thing becomes a great big lampshade, providing really the ambient light for the bedroom. And it also just looks great when you're coming up the driveway and you see these big lanterns. That is the Great American Master Bathroom. You're looking through a shower area to an outdoor shower. An outdoor fireplace is in the heart of this addition. This is one of the screen porches with a rolling screen door. So when the bugs aren't out, you can open it up to that fireplace courtyard. And when this client's children were little, they used to read their bedtime stories here on this built-in window seat, and to the left are the kids' bedrooms. Well, speaking of kids, some concluding thoughts. All the projects I've shown you bring nature into play. So why do that? Here's my thinking about this. When we were little, we were literally closer to the ground. And as a result, we were all just alive to nature. We were alive to all of life. Well, as we age, that sensitivity gets covered up. I think it just gets eclipsed by all the complexities of living. It gets eclipsed by our hurry. This is really a shame, I think, because there is inherent in much of nature a mysterious soothing quality. And how nice it would be if we could bring bits of that soothing quality into the midst of our daily comings and goings, into our hectic schedules, as a restorative moment. Well, what I've been trying to show today is that architecture has this marvelous capacity to reframe our awareness of nature. And in this way, I believe architecture can lift us above the complications. Thank you. Heather, Josh, I think I've talked enough. Hello?
That was wonderful.
Absolutely terrific.
So delighted to see your innovative work. And I must say, you can let your client in the Bahamas know that I'm available for house sitting anytime.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, it really was spectacular. We do have some questions. So if you're ready, I'll take a look. And they started to come in, in the early parts of the program as well. So some of them will refer to the earlier projects you talked about. Kelly asks, did you have any trouble with moss growing on the shingles of the East Texas cabins? Was that a problem at all?
No problem. No, there's not enough rainfall in Texas for that to happen. I'll tell you what we did have problems with, and made me appreciate our pioneer forebears. Spiders and spider webs. The surfaces of the buildings, the screens. Every time you'd go out to the site, there were just so many spider webs on everything. The owner finally had to hire a local person to go out there ahead of their visits with a broom and sweep the buildings and sweep off the screens. But that's really been the only problem. Turns out that composition shingles in the vertical plane actually weather really well. They still look great.
And the spiders want to live there too. That's nice.
Yeah.
I believe this is in reference to the family retreat you designed. How many people would actually be there at any one time?
Oh gosh. Well, it depends upon how friendly they are, Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 people at a time.
Okay, because there were how many cabins as part of the complex?
3 cabins. There's a master cabin. There's a bunkhouse with a his and her side with 2 sets of bunk beds in each one. And then there are big window seats in the main building that they've even used for people to sleep on. So actually, and then you could lie down there near the fireplace. I guess you could get 20 people.
Hmm.
So if you want to lease it or something, there you go.
John asks, well, first he says, fantastic architecture. What species of trees are running down the center of the house? Referring to the courtyard, I suppose.
Yeah, they are, I need to know the name of the genus, I guess. It is a crepe myrtle that has exfoliating cinnamon colored bark.
Hmm.
And in truth, that tree does a little better, a little east of Dallas. But what we're doing is by concentrating rainfall to each one of those runnels, it basically increases the annual rainfall to the tree. So fingers crossed, they should do well. But they have great fall color, and in the summertime, they blossom, they're covered with white blossoms. So the white blossoms and the white brick, it's really lovely.
Thank you. And by the way, this person who asked the question said that he was lucky enough to visit the house and loved the sun catchers in the new addition. Maybe he's referring to the hot house.
Oh yeah. Oh my.
Tom asks, besides Frank Lloyd Wright, who has been your inspiration for design parameters and elements?
Oh boy. there's a cast of characters. Certainly Louis Kahn, certainly Le Corbusier, certainly Carlos Scarpa, Aldo Van Eyck. I mean, it is just impossible to be bored as an architect. There's just so much richness and dreaming and idealism, sometimes foolish idealism, but it's so delicious. Who cares? So yeah, unlimited inspiration.
Your Pachacacha that you had, if people, it shows up on my computer. I hope it does with someone else. If you write Max Levy Pachacacha, was a great little thing about the folks who came to visit your school.
Oh God. Yeah.
That was terrific.
Yeah, that was, we saw lectures from Louis Kahn, Richard Neutra, Charles Moore, James Sterling, who am I leaving out? And Scarpa, oh God, how could I leave him out? Yeah, Scarpa. Yeah. Right. Yeah, Scarpa lectured entirely in Italian, but he still was a great lecture. It was just wonderful.
That's right. That came across in my Google search of you too, Max, is that that will come up if people want to see more of your presentations, because that's out there in the Ethernet.
Yeah.
One person asks, what are your views on using solar panels on houses?
You know, it's a real dilemma. Of course, I like the idea. I like the technology. I don't like the appearance of them. I've never seen them used in a way that is appealing. There certainly are ways of using them to where you don't see them. You can tell from the work that I've shown today that I'm a little more interested in the poetic alliance with nature. But let me just say a few things about that. I think the green movement, although it's necessary, I think its wheels have kind of gone into a ditch. The focus of the green movement is now to seal buildings up, hermetically sealed, to run air conditioning and heating 24 hours a day, whether it's needed or not. And this takes you away from nature. I'll just give you an example in Texas. It is true that in Texas, we have about 6 months of summer every year. But it's also true that we have about 6 months of pretty mild weather. Now, the mild weather is punctuated with some, really cold spells, as we've recently had. But all in all, it's pretty mild. And during those mild periods, if you just turn off all the mechanical systems and open up the building, you save far more energy than you do running artificial mechanical equipment year round. So I think we just need to come to our senses a little bit. I think we need to open up to nature a little bit more. I think we need to think more about, I don't know, I call it 19th century modernism, where, passive heating and cooling. Now, I'm not a fool. I'm so glad air conditioning was invented. I know we need lots of heating. I'm just saying that we're gorging on air conditioning and heating, and we're spending, expending so much more energy than we should be, even with the green movement. My soapbox, my apologies.
My office in West Texas. At my office in West Texas, I would have to wear a coat during the entire summer because the air conditioning was cranked up.
Oh, yes, that's right. Oh, I'd have to up here too. Yeah, it's true. It's just terribly wasteful.
Right.
Kathy asks, what was the phrase you said referring to not going overboard on the budget in the beginning of your presentation? It was so unique how you stated it, she says.
Please, about not going overboard.
Well, one time you said, and I thought it was a good way to put it, that you were very sober about the budget.
Well, that's probably it. Yeah, I guess.
And I don't know if that's what Kathy's thinking of, but I thought that was it.
I have to add something to that. That client that we did that family retreat for, when I first presented the project to him, I confess, I proposed that all those buildings be sheathed in copper because I thought they would weather beautifully in the woods. And he said this to me. He said, you know, I could afford that, but it's just not appropriate for a weekend place. And that was such a glass of cold water in my face, and it's affected me ever since.
Josh, unless you have a question, as I read through these, they are rave reviews for the most part.
Sure.
So,
Do you have any, how long did you live in the Midwest in Chicago?
Let's see, I was there for 3 years and loved or got a great experience at SOM, but learned that I really didn't belong in a huge firm like that. And moved back to Texas, worked for a great firm here, and then took the leap.
Well, you splashed into Texas in a big way right off the bat. There was all my friends knew your work and still do, and we keep up with it, and we just appreciate everything you've done. Once you go to the website, you'll see your sketches, your artwork. From your very beginning of your concepts and before, all the way through execution is just terrific. So thanks, Max, for that lifetime of work.
Well,
to send you with great thoughts for your weekend, Max, I'll just share a few of these. Susan says, unparalleled creative concepts paired with rational construction techniques, astounding. Max, you are amazing. Elegant designs and detailing. Thank you for your presentation. Acknowledgement of natural forces adds wonder for occupants, visitors, and viewers.
You know, this is great. I'm going to tune into this when I get depressed, which is about every day.
Well, hopefully in the future, in the soon, you'll be able to come up and visit us, and we'll do it all again.
I would love to.
I had one more trickle in, if you don't mind, Max. Our friend in the UK, Richard, wants to know, what heating systems do you use? Ground source or air source heat pumps?
Well, let's see, on some of the projects you've seen, we've done geothermal. Actually, I guess on a couple of them, it's just a conventional split system. But the geothermal is definitely the most efficient.
Thank you.
Well, that natural breeze through there is the best of all.
Yeah, oh, I think so.
Well, we can leave on this note, since I am the only non-Texan on this Zoom call in the presenter mode anyway. Nelson says, East Texas is indeed a special part of Texas. The Big Pine area is where I lived in the 1970s. Thanks for sharing your work.
Oh, wonderful.
I feel like we should be going out on Lyle Lovett or something.
Yeah. Well, oh God, I should do something like that sometime.
Well, I want to thank Max for his sharing of his wonderful work today. Josh, thanks for playing MC, and all of you attendees for joining us for an outstanding presentation. And we do need to thank our sponsor as well, American Institute of Architects Wisconsin, for presenting this in partnership with us today. So we've got a couple more of these in store in partnership with AIAW, so stay tuned. They will happen kind of quickly over the next 6 weeks, but we'll certainly let you know when we've got the dates ready to go and share with you. So thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Take care.
Thank you so much.
And Max and Josh, if you want to just stick around for a minute, we can.
Sure.